In this journey that we've taken in the life of Jacob, there's one verse that from the beginning has stayed a constant. And that's in Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. And I think of this and I think about my brother-in-law as well. Being confident of this very thing, that he which hath begun a good work in you will perform it unto the day of Jesus Christ. We know from the beginning of the story of Jacob's life that in the womb of Rebekah there was a struggle, there was a fight, and God had told her that the older would serve the younger. And that there were two nations in her womb. And that constant struggle, the supplanter, the heel grabber, so to speak, in their lives and the course of their lives, the Bible says that Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. And probably better said is that God had accepted Jacob and had rejected Esau. And as the story continues to unfold, we're starting to see now the separation or the difference between Jacob and Esau. Why? Because Jacob desired the blessings of God. Esau wanted the blessings of God, but he wanted the material gains or the material blessings. So we start to see the difference between Jacob and Esau. We start seeing their heart. As we read last week, and we spoke in chapter 32 of the book of Genesis, and I just want to recap it a little bit. So Genesis 32. We know that Jacob had left Haran. By the leading of God, the instruction of God, now he has this confrontation at hand, and it's with his brother Esau, who he did wrong 20 years ago. Stole his birthright. But the Bible tells us that Esau despised his birthright. And yet, as it unfolds, it's the heart of God and the heart of man and the desires of man. One for the spiritual things of God, the other one for material gain. Chapter 32, verse 6. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. So Jacob is thinking now, he's coming with all these men, he's coming with an army, he's coming to get his revenge, he's coming to destroy me. And the mind, we're troubled at times with what we see. And as we spoke last week, Jacob is devising a plan of preservation, of making two bands or two groups, and he figures, well, if Esau comes and he destroys one band, and still we'll have another band to enter into the land of Canaan. Verse 9. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, and the Lord which said unto me, Return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal with thee. I'm not worthy of the least of all the mercies, of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan now. I am become two bands. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me and the mother with his children. Jacob is troubled. He's in fear of his brother getting revenge. Do you ever think how many nights Jacob must have thought about his brother when he was in Haran? and the wrong that he had done and the sins that he had committed. That's a heavy weight to carry for 20 plus years. And knowing that he's going to encounter his brother, what's going to be his reaction? Is he's going to get his revenge? But we don't understand and we don't see, we don't know the hand of God in the life of Esau. God had blessed him and given him much material gain. And yet Jacob is carrying on. But he prays unto God because he feared him that the Lord will deliver him. Because it's like Jacob and Esau. Jacob is going to confront his brother. They're going to meet. They're going to have an encounter. Jacob is thinking one thing. His mind, his flesh is thinking, his brother is going to be after me for what I did to him 20 years ago. But he wants to make it right. But God has already dealt with Esau, but Jacob doesn't know it yet until they encounter in chapter 33. There was a time in the workplace, and there were a few people that would be a headache. I say to Rihanna, who's downstairs, I says, Rihanna, sometimes in the office wasn't very pretty. I says, the Papa's got a big mouth. There were a lot of times where the discussion was peaceful, but there were a lot of times when the discussion was loud. And there were a lot of times where I had to say, you see the door, you got to go back out that door. You want to talk, we'll talk, but I'm not going to yell and scream, but you got to go out that door. Unfortunately, I had an occasion with an employee who, beyond rough around the edges, pretty bad guy. He crossed the line in addressing me, and I wanted to jump out of my seat. That's one thing I don't tolerate. I don't like anybody yelling at me but my mom. That's a fact, and that's the truth. I don't take it well. But this man crossed the line plus a few untasteful words. And I had to tell him, this is the first time you do it and the last time you address me like that. This is the next time I'll bring you to public safety. They'll escort you out. And if you try to do it again, I'll meet you outside of work, wherever you want, and we'll take care of it outside of work. Sometimes that's just how it is. I couldn't take the way he addressed me. No way, no how, never. But I had to tell him, if you do it again, we'll meet outside. Not on state grounds. But it happens. Why do I say some of these things? You learn from experience that God is your helper. Just like Jacob. He's not a finished product, so to speak. He's on his journey in his relationship with God. He's not there yet, but God is working with him, dealing with him. 4 times he had an encounter with God. And every time he grew from that encounter, and we're going to get there. But that encounter, Jacob with the angel of the Lord as they wrestled through the night. Verse 24, and Jacob was left alone. And there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh. And the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince thou hast power with God and men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, wherefore is it that thus ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of this place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Again, I'm saying, is Jacob wrestling with the angel of the Lord, pre-incarnate Christ, or is the pre-incarnate Christ wrestling with him? But we see something about Jacob here. His determination, his strong will of not giving up, of fighting, of pressing on. I'm not letting go until you bless me. You ever been there? That's where I want to be. God, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. And that's why I enjoy sharing about the workplace. God puts people in your path, even in the workplace, to bless you. Yes, some will be obstacles. Yes, some will be offensive. Yes, some will be difficult. Don't lose sight of those that got places in your life to bless you. Don't lose sight of it. Because they're put there by God to make life easy for you when things are hard. Jacob knew that he saw God face to face. That name, Peniel, that he had seen God to face, and he didn't perish, that he didn't die. Yes, he touched the hollow of his hip there, and he had an injury. He says he'll never forget it as long as he lives, of that encounter with the pre-incarnate Christ. But what? His heart and his desire, different than Esau's. God, I won't let you go until you bless me. I want the blessings of God, is what he's saying. I'm not letting go until you give me the blessings of God. Now we're starting to see Jacob, his life, the change. The God who began a good work in him, he's faithful to complete it without the help of man. Chapter 33. And before we begin 33, the last verse in 33, there's a name there. El Elohi. El Elohi Israel. Now we're starting to see what is taking place in the transformation. I'm going to the end only because I want to share that name. God, God of Israel. Now, why am I there? Because Jacob in his prayer says, the God of my father Jacob, the God of my father Abraham, the God of my father Isaac. But here at the end of 33, he says, Elohi Israel, God, God of Israel. And God had changed Jacob's name to Israel. It's telling me of the transformation that is taking place in Jacob's life. His heart before God, his desire before God, and the new creation because God had separated him. Because at the beginning we would read and we can stop and we can pause. It says, God, what do you see in Jacob? We all pray just like Jacob. God, I'm unworthy. I'm unworthy. I'm unworthy. And yet he's thanking God because God has shown him the truth. God has protected him and delivered him. And he reminds himself, God, you promised that you're going to bring me back. You promised all the blessings of Abraham and of Isaac. But here, I'm concerned and I'm fearful of my brother Esau. And he might be coming to kill me. But he prays, God, deliver me. Let us not forget how many times God has delivered us. How many times has he delivered us? How many testimonies haven't we heard in this place? Maybe some that we haven't heard from each other, but testimonies that we recall and we remember. It says that could only be the deliverance of God. Verse 1 of chapter 33, and Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau came, and with him 400 men, and he divided the children unto Leah and unto Rachel and unto the two handmaids. And he put the handmaids and their children foremost, and Leah and her children after, and Rachel and Joseph hindermost. And he passed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. You know, I love this encounter. Because Jacob is thinking one thing, and Esau is at peace in his encounter with Jacob. Now, the future be told that the descendants of Esau were the Edomites, right? And they were bitter enemies of Israel. And if you read the book of Obadiah and the prophecies that God gave through Obadiah, was the destruction for Edom and the Edomites for their hatred and their bitterness to their brother Jacob. That's found in Obadiah chapter 1. Verse 4. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Here is Jacob. He's fearful. He's troubled in his heart and in his mind. Yes, Esau has every right to get his revenge against me. Remember that prayer, God deliver me. God, I'm in distress. God, I'm in fear. He confessed it before God, and God had already worked on his behalf. The God who keeps his promises. When I read Esau ran to him, my mind, I think about the prodigal son, and the father runs to him. And yes, you know, it's not the same. But I'm seeing what? I'm seeing God's grace and God's mercy at hand. Esau runs to him, but not to destroy him, not to insult him. He doesn't bring to his remembrance and to account, Jacob, I remember what you did to me 20 years ago. I remember how you stole that birthright. And yes, I was a fool because I gave it up for a bowl of soup of lentils. There's no talk of that. Esau runs to him. The favor of God, the mercy of God, the grace of God, and they embrace. I'm Jacob, and I'm holding on to Esau, and I don't know what to think. I don't know what to say. I was fearful. I was in distress, and look what God has done. All of a sudden, he's embracing me. He gives me a kiss on the neck, and how can this be? Thank God that God works on our behalf without giving us the details. You know why? Because we try to work it out. I talk about myself. Sometimes I'm going to work it out. But God has a different way of working it out. For him to receive all the honor, all the glory. But what? He's doing it on your behalf. He's doing it on Jacob's behalf. We can trust this God. Again, in the workplace, how many restless nights? Oh my God, I've got to encounter this tomorrow, and I got to take care of this, and I got to take care of that. I don't know how. God, it's too much. I don't have the answer. Help me. How many times? And every single time, the grace and the mercy of God, and it's like you turn around, who's in this room? Who's in this meeting? Where did that answer come from? Where did that all fall into place? How did it happen? Who? God. And by the people that God puts into place to bless you. There's people in the workplace, listen, they want you to look bad. All right? You know? And I'm sorry I'm bringing in the workplace, but, you know, there's people that mean evil for you. Why? Because you're a Christian. Oh, they want to see you fall. And I've heard it many, many times. People say, be careful here, be careful there. And says, I know. I'm just asking God to help me. And people would say, no, I want to fall flat on his face so he can be embarrassed before his authorities. And I could say humbly, not one time. Not one time. It was like Haman and Mordecai. Not one time did God fail. Even when I wanted to take matters into my own hands, I said, God, no, I can't. But please help me. I can't do it. Help me. And there was always help. And you see the heart of man. You see the hardness of man. And yet, God won't allow it. But Esau has a soft heart now in encountering Jacob. Who did it? Esau didn't do it. Yes, he had received the blessings of God, but his heart was soft towards his brother. Isn't that what we want? We want reconciliation. We want forgiveness. Yes, when we offend, and yes, when we fall short, but yes, you know, the ability to humble oneself and says, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I did it. Yes, I said it. Forgive me. I'm saying Jacob had to be speechless here. How could this be? All night I worried, the last few days, planning and scheming, how am I going to work it out to preserve my family? And here it is, look what God did. He could say, indeed, God kept his promise. He could say, indeed, God heard my prayer. Yes, and as we see Elohi Israel, my God, no longer the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, but also my God, the God of Jacob, the God of Israel, the God who revealed himself to me, the God who met me, the God who I wrestled with and he wrestled with me, the God who heard me is my God. You know, and as I share what God is doing, and I'm saying, God, I'm seeing it, I'm hearing it, I just want to watch it. I want to sit, I want to be quiet, I want to listen. And I say, God, help him to share the gospel. Give him wisdom, you know, a babe in Christ. Give him wisdom, instruct him, the gentleness, the grace, the mercy. But God, do it all for your honor and glory, that when men would listen, they have to sit and be quiet and listen. I say, that's the last thing Jacob expected. His brother's going to come to him, is going to run to him, embrace him, and give him a kiss. All for God, all forgiven. What happened to the terror that he had during the night? God had taken care of him. The circumstances in life were fearful. I hear testimonies, and I know sometimes people keep their things private. But I hear testimonies, and I remember white cabinets. I remember white cabinets, and some people know what I'm talking about. And yet, what do you see? You say, you don't know that God's already working on your behalf. Just like the woman at Zarephath. I'm here to die. I got nothing. But see, God sees. And God knows, and God delivers, and God provides, and God blesses, and his name is magnified, his name is glorified. Why? He's my provider. He's my God. Just like Jacob is saying at the end of this chapter, my God, God of Israel, my God. We say, but God, you see all things. You not only move mountains, but you move men. And you change their heart. And everything falls into place because you're the sovereign God who's in full control. Verse 5, and Esau, and he lifted up his eyes and saw the woman and the children and said, who are those with thee? And he said, the children which God hath graciously given thy servant. Then the handmaidens came near, they and their children, and they bowed themselves. And Leah also with her children came near and bowed themselves. And after came Joseph near and Rachel, and they bowed themselves. And he said, what meanest thou by all this drove which I met? And he said, these are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. I want to go back a little bit here. Remember, where was Jacob? Wasn't he first at the rear guard? And yet here, he's the first one to encounter Esau. Remember that from chapter 32? He's at the rear guard, and I'm saying, why is Jacob at the back? You know, Benny Hinn used to hire bodyguards to protect them. And I'm saying, your God is so small that that's what he's saying to me, I don't know. Your God is so small that you need a bodyguard to protect you? Well, who is the God that you preach? Who's the God that you preach? Was he able to deliver Daniel? But he's no longer at the rear guard. Why? Something is taking place in the heart and in the mind and the life of Jacob. And it is God working, it is God dealing, and him beginning to trust in the will of God instead of him putting his hands in it. And that's critical for a Christian. Sometimes we think, I gotta. And sometimes we put our hands where our hands don't belong. You ever have to make a tough decision with the people you love? And you got to draw the line, and you got to say the truth, and it hurts. It hurts you, but you got to do it for their own good. You know, it's like, okay, the buck stops here, grow up. Don't lean on me. Lean on the same God that I lean on, but don't lean on me. Don't put your trust in man. Put it in God. God will deliver you. God will provide. God will bless you. God will strengthen you. He'll meet you every time you call upon his name. And I'm not saying not to be there for loved ones. You love your loved ones. But there's times where you got to draw a line. And yet there, the maturity of a Christian, when you say, God, I have to leave this in your hands because I can't do anything. Like I said before about our niece. And God has rescued her. God has saved her. But she can go back to that same group and tell them, look what Christ is doing in my life. They'll listen. Because it's their own peers. And they'll have an open door. But only God can do that. Trust God. Verse 8, and he said, why meanest thou by all this drove which I met? And he said, these are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. And Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep that thou hast unto thyself. I love that answer from Esau. Probably a simple answer. But he's saying, Jacob, what are you doing? What are you bringing here? You're trying to appease me with these gifts. God has given me material gain. Exactly what I wanted. That's what he got. He didn't want the spiritual things of God. We know that. But God had given him his heart's desire. Did he not? But Jacob, what are you doing? You're bringing me all these gifts, all these presents. I have enough. Keep it for yourself. Why did you do this? Why did you bring it? Jacob's answer in the culture of that time. Verse 10, and Jacob said, nay, I pray thee, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my present at my hand, for therefore I have seen thy face as though I had seen the face of God, and thou wast pleased with me. Take, I pray thee, my blessing that is brought to thee, because God hath dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. And he urged him, and he took it. Jacob was bringing these gifts, yes, to appease Esau, but to find grace and forgiveness and reconciliation in the eyes and the heart of Esau. Esau doesn't want any part of it. It's already been forgotten and forgiven according to how Esau is dealing with his brother. But Jacob insists, you've got to take it as a gift, that you would accept my forgiveness. And that reconciliation can come about. And he urged them, and he took it. Verse 12, and he said, let us take our journey, and let us go, and I will go before thee. And he said unto him, my Lord knoweth that the children are tender, and the flocks and herds with young are with me, and if men should overdrive them one day, all the flock will die. Let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I would lead on softly according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure until I come unto my Lord unto Seir. And Esau said, let me now leave with thee some of the flock that are with me. And he said, what needeth it? Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way unto Seir. And Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and built him an house, and made booths for his cattle. Therefore the name of the place is called Succoth. And Jacob came to Salem, the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram, and pitched his tent before the city. And he brought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he erected an altar there and called it Elohi Israel. You see the plan of God? You see the sovereignty of God? You see God dealing with Jacob and bringing him and getting him to this point? Elohi Israel. God of Israel. A relationship with God now. Captivated by God. knowing and understanding what God is doing in his life and through his life. Yes, it took time. Yes, it took this journey. Yes, he went to Haran. God brings him back, but God is not done with Jacob. Can we not say the same about us? God is not done with us, and we're a work in progress more than we care to admit. A lot, we're like Jacob, right? God, I got to work it out. God, I got to figure out a plan. I want it to fall into place. I want it all to come together. And I want to put my hands in it. And I want to make it human efforts. And then we have to pause. But God, your will be done. Isn't that the struggle with Jacob? His will and the will of God? And yet, who will always win? Just like in the wrestling match, who always wins? It's good when we surrender our will to the will of God. Where is the place for Jacob to be? Is in the will of God. That's all he has to do, is be in the will of God. That's all he needs. That's all we need. That's all I need, is to be in the will of God. God will lead me. God will guide me. He'll direct you. He'll supply all your needs. He'll give you his wisdom. He'll give you his knowledge. He'll give you his word. He'll give you his strength. He'll give you all that you need. We know chapter 34 and the defilement of Dinah and how her brothers took revenge on Shechem. But I want to turn to chapter 35. I want to close in a few minutes, but I want to read something here. Verse 1. And God said unto Jacob, Arise, go up to Bethel, and dwell there, and make there an altar unto God, that appeared unto thee when thou fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother. Again, how wonderful. God tells him, go back to Bethel, where he first had his encounter with God, where he first had that dream. Go back to Bethel. But clear, specific instruction of what to do. God not leaving it to a mystery or to Jacob's devices. Where's the best place I should go? Where should I dwell? Where do I buy property? Where do I build a house? So on and so forth. God is telling him where to go and what to do. And that God would be with him. But God reminds him of where God met him and where God delivered him, that God is with him every step of the way. Then Jacob said unto his household and to all that were with him, Put away the strange gods that are among you, and be clean and change your garments. And let us arise and go up to Bethel, and I will make there an altar unto God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and was with me in the way which I went. Now here's a good leader, because he's turning the people back to God. Isn't that a beautiful work? First, God is dealing with Jacob, right? One-on-one. He's dealing with him alone. Now he's dealing with all the people that God has blessed him with. And he says, let's put away the strange gods. Let's seek the face of God and even change your garments. And it's just me. But I'm thinking about this and saying, the work that God does on the inside will be evident on the outside. Isn't that a fact? And let us arise and go to Bethel, and I will make there an altar unto God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and was with me in the day which I went. You ever discouraged or facing hardship or whatever you may be going through? Remember the times that God has delivered you. Remember the times that God has provided for you. And the song as we sing, He'll do it again. Doesn't He do it again and again and again for all His glory and honor? Verse 4, they gave unto Jacob all the strange gods which were in their hand, and all their earrings which were in their ears. And Jacob hid them under the oak which was by Shechem. And they journeyed, and the terror of God was upon the cities that were around about them, and they did not pursue them after the sons of Jacob. And the terror of God was upon the cities. Just think of that. What were those terrors? That they were all shaken. And they were all afraid. Why? But here comes Jacob. But not just Jacob. Here comes Elohim before Jacob. And he's led him here. He's brought him here. So it is the God who is the true God who is coming before Jacob. And to bless him, let us not touch what God is doing. Let us not be a hindrance. Let us not be an obstacle. Sit and watch and behold. But they know that the terror of God is coming before him. We've read that many, many times in the scriptures of the Old Testament. Fearing God Almighty. Jacob was afraid because he was going to encounter his brother Esau. But yet here now, as he returns to Bethel, it is the terror of God throughout all the cities. Now, Jacob now would have cause for fear and distress because what took place at Shechem and what his sons had done to avenge what was done to their sister, to Jacob's daughter, was it not? And yet what happens? Again, the God that goes before us. We have this plaque that Ned gave me in the kitchen. It says, do not fear tomorrow. God's already there. The God who transcends time, but God who is working on our behalf for the rest of today, for the rest of tomorrow, for the rest of our lives. The God who watched over Jacob, and he watches over Jacob well, is the same God who watches over you. Isn't that of comfort and of peace? We say, but God, why? I'm unworthy. I'm just like Jacob. I'm unworthy. And yes, I need for you to smooth the rough edges. Right? I need for you to continue this good work in me. I need for you to mold me and shape me. But I'm going to need those moments where, God, I'm alone with you and where I'm going to hold on and say, God, I'm in distress and I'm in fear, but I'm not going to let go. God, I'm hurting, I'm discouraged, but I'm not going to let go. God, I'm troubled and I have trials, but I'm not going to let go until you bless me, until you renew my strength, until you renew my faith, until I see your hand, but I'm not letting go. I love that name. Remember that. Elohim Israel. God. God of Israel. God is saying, my God. My God. The God who had encountered him. The God who had changed his name to Israel. The God who had called him, separated him for service. God was working and dealing in his life. Fulfillment of his promise. I mentioned Esau and I mentioned the Edomites, and read Obadiah. God promised Abraham, I will bless those that bless you, and I will curse them that curse you. And that will be to the very end, to the last day. The nations that come up against Israel, look at the Old Testament. What happened to all those nations, Mike? They were all destroyed. They fought against Israel. All destroyed. Will God keep his promise to defend and protect Israel to the very end? That's a promise from God. Let us pray for the nation of Israel. Please, as you go home, I just wanted to jump and just reading that name. And I repeat it, yes, I repeat it again. Elohim Israel. I love that name. Because it's what has taken place in the life of Jacob. Maybe in the beginning he didn't quite understand. And yes, he's trying to help God and he's maneuvering him and his mother and they're scheming and they're planning and that's who he is. But God had a bigger and better plan with Jacob's life. just like our lives. God wants to take us step by step and to teach us and to mature us and to strengthen us and to equip us. But sometimes that process is painful. Sometimes it's hard. And sometimes you got to eat humble pie. It says, but it's okay. Jacob had to surrender his will, that the will of God may be done. Us, just like Jacob, surrendering our will that the will of God may be done. We'll continue and probably wrap this up next week, if that's how God would have it fall into place. But to put it all together, and Jacob's encounters with God, the blessings, and then a few chapters later, Joseph's journey, and we love the story of Joseph. I'm not sure that's where I'm going next, but we love the story of Joseph and how it all unfolds, and the God who's in control, and the God who brings us to where he wants to use us. Remember that name? Elohi Israel.